Groundbreaking for the construction of the Pentagon began on September 11, 1941. Exactly 60 years later to the day, Flight 77 allegedly breaches the wall of Wedge 1, striking the outer E-ring of America's symbol of military power. At the time of the 9/11 attacks, the World Trade Center towers were undergoing a fireproofing upgrade to better ensure the building's fire resistance. In an incredible coincidence, the floors of both towers where the upgrades had been completed were the same floors that were struck by the airplanes on 9/11. Turner Construction Company, who supervised the demolition of the Seattle Kingdome in the year 2000 and was one of the 4 cleanup contractors at Ground Zero, occupied the 38th floor of the North Tower and was involved in performing those fireproofing upgrades inside the towers in the 3 years leading up to 9/11. One of the contractors in charge of cleanup at Ground Zero after the attacks was Turner Construction Company. Once the cleanup of Ground Zero was fully coordinated, the operations were consolidated under 2 primary contractors, AMEC Construction Management and Bovis Lend-Lease. A truly surprising fact is that at the time of the 9/11 attack, AMEC was just 5 days away from completing a $258 million refurbishment of Wedge 1 of the Pentagon, which began in 1998. Wedge 1 is the exact location that American Airlines Flight 77 allegedly impacted the building. The Bush administration was so resistant to the idea of launching an official investigation into the events of 9/11 that it took over 440 days after the attack to get the investigation started. And this only happened after independent groups put massive public pressure on the government to call for an official inquiry. Key members of the 9/11 Commission, including Chairman Lee Hamilton and Thomas Keane, openly admit that the 9/11 Commission was, quote, set up to fail in many ways, citing lack of funding, insufficient time, Commission members with serious conflicts of interest, and cover-ups. Many Commission members have come forward and openly criticized the government for sabotaging their investigation. 9/11 Commissioner Max Cleland resigned from the commission in disgust, stating, quote, "It is a national scandal. This investigation is now compromised. One of these days we'll have to get the full story because the 9/11 issue is so important to America, but this White House wants to cover it up," end quote. When asked in 2009 if he thought there should be another 9/11 commission, Cleland responded, quote, "There should be about 15 9/11 commissions," end quote. The senior counsel to the 9/11 Commission, John Farmer, who led the 9/11 staff's inquiry, said, quote, "At some level of the government, at some point in time, there was an agreement not to tell the truth about what happened." The 9/11 commissioners concluded that officials from the Pentagon lied to the commission and seriously considered recommending criminal charges for providing false statements. Before noon on September 11th at the New York Air Route Traffic Control Center in Ronkonkoma, New York, about 16 air traffic controllers met in a basement conference room known as the Bat Cave and passed around a microphone, each recalling his or her version of the tragic events a few hours earlier. The New York Times reported that a quality assurance manager at the center, for some unknown reason, destroyed the tape several months after it was made, crushing the cassette in his hand, cutting the tape into little pieces, and dropping them in different trash cans around the building. 10 days after 9/11 and after the U.S. had begun bombing Afghanistan, plans to take over 7 countries, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran, were revealed to 4-star General Wesley Clark. Believe it or not, the invasions were not based on links to Al-Qaeda or any other intelligence reports. The link to this video is in the description below, and I strongly encourage you to watch it for yourself. A petrodollar system was created in the 1970s. This means that since that time, every nation must purchase the oil it takes to run their country using only the US dollar currency. This dollars for oil arrangement has greatly enriched our nation and given us a high standard of living at the expense of other nations and their potential prosperity. If this system is ever disrupted in any way, it will severely threaten the American way of life and the empire of its leaders. Such a massive disruption did occur on September 24th, 2000, a year before 9/11. Saddam Hussein allegedly emerged from a meeting of his government and claimed that Iraq would soon transition its oil export transactions to the euro currency. By 2002, Saddam had dumped the dollar and fully converted to a petro-euro. If other nations followed suit, it would destroy the U.S. economy. Though there was no evidence to support the implication that Hussein was involved in the 9/11 attacks, within a few short weeks after the Afghanistan war had begun, Washington began using the corporate-controlled mainstream media to build their case for a full-scale invasion of Iraq. Soon after that invasion, Iraq was placed back on the petrodollar system, causing them to lose more than 17% of their exchange rate profits. For a detailed description of the massive importance of the petrodollar cycle and how it affects your life, click on this video for more information and it'll open a tab in a new window. By some bizarre coincidence, the Chantilly, Virginia-based National Reconnaissance Office had scheduled an interesting exercise for the morning of September 11, 2001, in which a small corporate jet would crash into one of the 4 towers at the agency's headquarters. Spokesman Art Hobald said, quote, "It was just an incredible coincidence that this happened to involve an aircraft crashing into our facility. As soon as the real-world events began, we canceled the exercise." Lieutenant Colonel Shelton Langford of the United States Marine Corps candidly said, quote, "September 11, 2001 seems destined to be the watershed event of our lives and the greatest test for our democracy and our lifetimes. The evidence of government complicity in the lead up to the event, the failure to respond during the event, and the astounding lack of any meaningful investigation afterwards, as well as the ignoring of evidence turned up by others that renders the official explanation impossible, may signal the end of the American experiment. It has been used to justify all manners of measures to legalize repression at home and as a pretext for behaving as an aggressive empire abroad. Until we demand an independent, honest, and thorough investigation and accountability for those whose action and inaction led to those events and the cover-up, our republic and our Constitution remain in the gravest danger. When questioned if a formal investigation has ever been launched against Larry Silverstein after admitting that he had given the order to pull World Trade 7 down in a 2002 PBS interview, Senator John Kerry admitted that those who brought Building 7 down did it in a controlled fashion. After the 9/11 attacks, everyone in the White House, from Condoleezza Rice to George Bush, repeatedly told reporters that no one ever envisioned hijackers flying planes into buildings. Maybe they should have consulted with Hollywood. The first episode of an X-Files spin-off called The Lone Gunman, which aired March 4, 2001, 7 months before 9/11, involved a U.S. government conspiracy to hijack an airliner, fly it into the World Trade Center, and blame it on terrorists, resulting in public support for a new profit-making war. Now there's some intelligence for you. The Pentagon is possibly the most secure and certainly one of the most monitored buildings on the planet. Yet government officials would only release small slivers of footage from 9/11. The Pentagon footage, together with the hotel and gas station footage in that area, only shows an explosion. There is no evidence of an airplane hitting the Pentagon. The official 9/11 report states that Flight 93 crash-landed in Shanksville, a borough in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. However, Wally Miller, a Somerset County coroner and one of the first at the crash site, told the Houston Chronicle, quote, "It looked like somebody just dropped a bunch of metal out of the sky," end quote. The Washington Post quoted him as saying, quote, "It looked like someone took a scrap truck, dug a 10-foot ditch, and dumped trash into it," end quote. After arriving on the scene, Miller said, quote, "I stopped being coroner after about 20 minutes because there were no bodies there," end quote. The Pittsburgh Review quoted Miller as saying, quote, "I have not to this day seen a single drop of blood. Not a drop." Strangely, Miller has since done an about-face on his previous testimony. After the 9/11 attacks, a seemingly pre-prepared and voluminous 342-page U.S. Patriot Act, which grants unprecedented government access into the private lives of Americans, quickly passed the House on October 24th, the Senate on October 25th, and was signed into law by the President on October 26th, a mere 45 days after 9/11. It gave authorities the power to search homes and businesses without consent, search email, telephones, and financial records without a court order, and basically offered an excuse to suspend Fourth Amendment rights. Number 1 is coming up, and if you enjoyed this content, click that red subscribe button for more interesting videos. No matter what people may think about him, there's a guy named William Cooper who, on a radio broadcast on June 28, 2001, less than 3 months before 9/11, predicted a 9/11 type event would be blamed on Osama bin Laden, at a time when bin Laden was virtually unknown to the general public. Cooper was found dead in his home less than 2 months after the attacks. If you enjoyed this video and you think others could benefit by viewing it, click that like button and share it on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you want to see more videos like this, as well as a mix of other content, give that subscribe button a click. For more information and additional content, let's connect on Facebook at facebook.com/highimpactflix and reach out to me on Twitter at highimpactflix. Until next time, remember, it's easier to deceive the masses than to convince them that they've been deceived.